Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Schoolboy Q, titled Oxymoron. So, the Grammys are a complete joke. Now, it's amazing how few people actually seem to know this because they take it shockingly seriously for an award show that has never really earned the clout in the industry for a show like the Academy Awards. Now, we metal fans have known that the Grammys are a joke. We've known it for years because the metal and hard rock awards have never gone to the best acts in the genre or even the critically acclaimed acts. Or, let's put it another way, Evanescence, Linkin Park, Slipknot, and Korn have more Grammys than Dream Theater, Queens of the Stone Age, or Ayreon. Yeah, I know prog metal is seldom ever well reviewed in any category, anywhere, but there's still something wrong with that. Something very, very wrong. Well, a few weeks ago, the hip-hop community, who don't remember that Will Smith, Young MC, and Chris Brown have more Grammys than Public Enemy or De La Soul or Tupac Shakur or Biggie Smalls, got pretty angry that Macklemore won Best Rap Album of the Year over Kendrick Lamar's star-making album of 2012, Good Kid, Mad City. And as much as I like The Heist by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, it's not better than Kendrick Lamar, who is probably one of the biggest genuine talents to come out of rap music for a pretty long while. The man is smart, nuanced, has a great ability to switch things up and vary his flow, and he's currently signed to Aftermath and he's working with Eminem, so if he handles his career well, he'll be fine. Now the fun fact is, like most rappers who get famous, Kendrick is using some of his newfound fame to give some of his friends a popular boost, and that means we're coming to Schoolboy Q, fellow member of Black Hippie and gangster rapper in his own right. Now I first became familiar with the guy off his first full-length album, Setbacks, and honestly, while it was good enough, I wasn't really blown away. Schoolboy Q had a flexible, versatile flow, but there were a lot of sloppy rhymes on that record, and not nearly enough original content to impress me much or differentiate him from any other gangsta rapper. Now, his socially conscious, more mature songs, they were always the best on that album. They were the best of the bunch, but there was a lot of weed rap and a lot of brag rap that wasn't all that engaging and stuff, frankly, that I'd heard plenty of times before. Now, fortunately for all of us, his technique got a lot better on the follow-up, Habits and Contradictions, an entire album set on exploring the inherent contradictions in the gangsta lifestyle and in Schoolboy Q himself. The album is dark and moody, but yet it never really loses any of its forward momentum. Most of the beats are surprisingly strong and engaging. Schoolboy Q brings a dark viciousness to his delivery, and all of his guest stars actually managed to deliver. What's even better is how that album works on two levels. If you want crass, hard-hitting gangster rap, you'll find it here, definitely. But if you look in the right spots, you'll find a surprisingly mature record lurking underneath it that trusts the audience enough not to spell out its insight. And while I won't say the album is precisely great or a classic, I've definitely heard a lot worse gangster rap albums in the course of my life. And I have to admit, I was more than a little interested when what he delivered with Oxymoron, his major label debut, and apparently a record where Schoolboy Q had a lot more creative control and flexibility on what he wanted to put forward. Now, he stressed that he was sticking with his gangsta image, and that gave me mixed feelings. I mean, on the one hand, gangster rap has a certain visceral appeal as a power fantasy, and Schoolboy Q is smart enough not to frame himself as a role model by any means. On the other hand, we've had gangster rap for over 20 years now, and he was already retreading old ground on his last albums, albeit doing it well. So what new material was Schoolboy Q going to bring to the table here? Well, to my pleasant surprise, Schoolboy Q does manage to bring a bit of fresh paint to the West Coast gangster rap subgenre, and indeed, your ability to enjoy Oxymoron is going to completely depend on how much of the drugs, sex, violence, power fantasy that you can really take in. The majority of it done completely without irony. Now, that being said, if you're familiar and comfortable with the genre, Schoolboy Q is definitely a worthy contender, and he does bring some pretty solid insight and nuance to a record that does have some really banging tracks that I really liked, even though I would argue he doesn't quite do it enough and bring that insight enough to the forefront, especially coming off the very heavily loaded album, Habits and Contradictions. In other words, I find the album very, very good, but not quite a great one or a classic of the genre. So, okay, let's start with Schoolboy Q himself, who proves to have quite the emotional range on this record, bouncing between hard-hitting, spitting gangster rapper and smoother, funkier elements with considerable ease. It helps that he has a buckets of charisma, and his wide-ranging, versatile flow remains his best asset. Although, I'm still a little divided about how serious I should take him, because sometimes his delivery can get a little bit cartoonish. Honestly, at his best though, he reminds me of T.I.'s flow on his darker, more sly tracks, where it's never really harsh or grating, but it doesn't need to be to have the underlying darkness. In terms of gangsta rap, it arguably takes the best of both sides of it, having the dark energy and vitriol, but never really crossing the line to become brutish or threatening. And it really helps the matters that most of his guest stars got the picture going in. Kendrick Lamar spits a pretty decent multilingual verse on Collard Greens. Tyler the Creator and Corrupt bring some real menace to the purge, and Raekwon and Suga Free bring some of that old school flavor and pretty damn solid lines on their own to their respective tracks. The only person who feels out of place on this album is 2 Chainz, who tries to balance out his generic luxury rap with token mentions of hustling cocaine, but let's be honest here, Schoolboy Q blows him out of the water in flow, energy, and content. However, 2 Chainz' presence on this album is indicative of a bigger issue, and that takes us to the instrumentation, which has a lot more trap elements than I'd like, but it at least fits the darker tone, and Schoolboy Q is only referencing luxury rap tropes ironically at best. At their best though, the beats call back to some grimy, mid to late 90s G-funk, which kind of makes it frustrating that Pharrell's flashy, fuzzy production on Los Awesome is such a poor fit with the rest of the album, when normally his production was a lot tighter and would probably better fit with this album. But outside of Mike Will Made It continuing to show that he's one of the worst producers working in mainstream hip-hop today, I really dug a lot of the beats on this album. The highlight for me being Hell of a Night, with the ghostly backing vocals, the steel drums on the chorus, and the quickness of the bass, giving the album a real sense of tempo and momentum. What really impressed me most about this album was the texture and atmosphere in the instrumentation, especially on the darker, more introspective tracks like Hoover Street, Prescription Oxymoron, Blind Threats, and His and Her Fiend. It's bleak, and it's grimy, and it's incredibly immersive. And even though I'm not normally a fan of trap percussion traits and all the hi-hats, it doesn't really hurt the overall ambiance of the songs for me, and that's a credit to the production. However, the weaker tracks on this album, they do feel a little bit watered down, and the melodies aren't as catchy, and they don't really quite stick with me in the same way, as they do sound like they're trying to fuse some of the old school grimy G-funk with more futuristic modern trap, and I gotta be honest, it doesn't quite work here. But of course, we have to talk about the lyrics and the themes. And right from the beginning, I liked the primary idea that Schoolboy Q was trying to pursue with this album. The title loosely follows on from Habits and Contradictions, because Oxymoron has an interesting dichotomy that Schoolboy Q is trying to explore. How he's been hustling and he's selling drugs and saying and doing terrible things, but he's all doing it because he's trying to support his daughter and his family. In other words, he's doing a lot of bad things with good intentions. And whenever this album taps into that deeper level of insight, either through passing shots taken at Lil Wayne on the opener, or a snide dismissal of brand names and luxury rap on The Purge, or genuine moral dilemmas playing out on one of the album's best tracks in Blind Threats, it just plays out incredibly well here. Of course, Oxymoron also has a double meaning, also referring to oxycodone, a drug that he both used to sell and to which he actually got addicted. And the artistic framing on these tracks, it's phenomenal. It's great, as it paints the very, very dark picture of doing all this because he has to support his family, and he's not a role model by any stretch of the mind, which actually, that paradoxically makes him more of a likable character, more of an anti-hero. And you know what? I just wish that the album went further in this direction. Now, don't get me wrong, Schoolboy Q puts enough of a fresh spin on gangsta cliches to never quite feel like he's copying some of the rappers of the past, but I do feel that the serious angle and deeper themes were a little bit neglected in favor of tracks covering a lot of similar ground that we've seen before. Furthermore, Schoolboy Q doesn't really upend those West Coast gangsta cliches. We get our songs about weed, club sex, selling drugs, being violent, and gang activity. And I hate to be crass, but I've seen all this before. As I said, gangsta rap's been around for 20 years, and I've been listening to it for over a decade. And Schoolboy Q never quite brings enough slick wordplay or deeper insight to really elevate that material past the cliches, at least not consistently. And you know what? That's probably where I stand on Schoolboy Q and on Oxymoron as a whole. It's a good, reasonably intelligent gangster rap record that's trying really hard to work on two levels. Have the rough riding, hard-edged gangsta material, and then play it off and add a little bit of nuance and depth by saying that he knows everything he's doing is wrong and he's just doing it for his family. Now that's a tough balance to pull off, and through a good chunk of this record, he does pull it off amazingly, but there are points here that ring a little hollow and just a little bit disingenuous to me. I don't quite buy into all of his better intentions, and that's a little frustrating. Now that being said, I actually did like this album a lot more than I thought I would, and I'm giving it a 7 out of 10, as this record is definitely worth your time, especially if you're a fan of West Coast gangster rap, particularly from the mid to late 90s. Schoolboy Q might not have made a classic with Oxymoron, but he did make a solid, very frequently enjoyable, and often cleverly insightful record, and I urge you all to go check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming out this year that you'd like me to cover, or if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to hear it. So until then, see you next time.